Hello, I'm Lanre Lasisi, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this week's episode of the Gavel. Now, it's been a very busy week for federal lawmakers in the National Assembly with motions, bills, investigations, and public hearings taking place from one end of the complex to the other. Now, the aviation sector is going through a tough patch with local airlines packing up and international airlines pulling out. It's a situation lawmakers considered during the week. The Senate has also started an investigation into allegations of connivance by communication giant MTN with some banks in the country in the repatriation of $13.9 billion out of the country between 2006 and 2016. I think that is a good point to start. Let's take that report.
It's the first day of an investigative hearing by the Senate Committee on Banking over some weighty allegations leveled against Mobile Telecommunication Network MTN, the Minister of Trade and Investment, and some commercial banks in Nigeria. A federal lawmaker, Senator Dino Melaye, accused the mobile telecommunication company MTN of conniving with some banks and the Minister of Trade and Investment to illegally repatriate $13.92 billion, and that MTN did not request for a certificate of capital importation from its bankers, Standard Chartered Bank, within the regulatory period of 24 hours of the inflow. The Minister of Trade and Investment was scheduled to give his testimony on the allegations leveled against him, but he left immediately after the opening ceremony to the annoyance of the committee.
The Honorable Minister, I'm aware that he walked in just like 2 minutes before we walked in because of the session in the plenary. He has earlier written, and immediately he walked in, he sent me a note that he wants to leave for another important assignment at 2 p.m. I now wrote back to him that if he leaves, he will be presumed to be absent for today's session.
That out of the way, the Chief Executive Officer of MTN gives his testimony. He explains why MTN did not request for a certificate of capital importation from his bankers within the 24 hours regulatory period.
However, I think there's something you do need to understand, that the 24-hour rule is not in all cases practical. It is almost impossible to comply with it, and in our particular case, this was definitely the issue.
But the chairman, MTN Nigeria, denies any wrongdoing by the company.
The allegations are completely false. MTN complied with extant laws and regulations. Requests for CCIs are continuing events made as and when brought in. The critical question at this juncture are, were foreign currencies imported into Nigeria through an authorized dealer? Because MTN is not an authorized dealer. By the providers of capital in MTN, the answer is yes. How much was imported by the providers of capital in MTN? When was the foreign currency imported by the providers of capital in MTN? All these questions have been sufficiently answered in this response.
Senator Dino Melaye insists that MTN engaged in financial impropriety.
The law is straight, that it said 24 hours. Meanwhile, CCI was raised 5 years after. Is that not a contravention of the law?
The committee would be analyzing the documents submitted by all the concerned parties in the next few days.
Now, all we have to do is to wait for the report of that committee and their recommendations. Now, let's move over to the challenges facing the aviation sector, a concern raised by federal lawmakers.
Of Aviation Committee.
Lawmakers and representatives of government agencies here for a public hearing on the challenges facing the country's aviation sector. This public hearing follows a motion passed by the House on the need to rescue the airline industry from imminent collapse. The chairman of the House Committee outlined some of the challenges that are of concern to the House.
The suspension of operations by local airlines, increasing termination of operations by international airlines, licensing requirements and capacity of local airlines, allegations of corruption against local airlines and some persons and some organizations in the sector.
The Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives believes the sector is too viable to be ignored.
This sector also supports 159,000 jobs in the country, comprising 44,000 jobs directly supported by the aviation sector, 64,000 jobs indirectly supported by the aviation sector, 51,000 jobs supported through the spending by the employees of the aviation sector and its supply chain. In addition, there are further 130,000 people employed through the catalytic process, that is the tourism effect of the aviation sector. Thus, a sector as vibrant and economically relevant as this cannot be allowed to be in the media for the negative reasons.
The Minister of State for Aviation was the first to put forward his position. He says the present economic situation has led to the downturn in the sector. One of the ways government hopes to address some of the challenges is to focus on some airports.
But we will concession them to put them to a better use, to increase their capacity. And when we say concession, oftentimes people feel that we mean that we will give the structures the way they are and they will be run and managed by some people. Or we will go through the same old way that so-called concession within aviation has been handled. Those concessions that were handled were in absolute secrecy for the most part, and there were a lot of underdealings within them, and there is no participation, even by the member of staff in FAN, talk less of the union, who are the most important anyway.
It's a position some of the workers in the airport are opposed to.
And out of these airports, it is only 4 that are economically viable. And coincidentally, it is these 4 that are targeted for concession. So our first fear is what happens to the remaining 17.
It's clear that this debate will continue over the next few days as the House continues this 4-day public hearing. The current challenges facing the Nigerian aviation sector has continued to worry industry players. The situation is also of concern to both arms of the National Assembly. In the Senate, a motion was considered on the matter.
The Senate therefore notes also that government must begin to put in place a more lasting and sustainable program of intervention and policy direction that will put the industry back in the course of growth.
The Senate resolved to support the steps being taken by the executive to intervene in the current challenges being faced by the aviation industry. Meanwhile, the public hearing by the House Committee on Aviation on the need to rescue the airline industry from collapse continued with more presentation by industry players. The day's session tried to look at a previous concession in the aviation sector that is now the focus of a legal tussle.
FAN has shown complete disregard for constituted authority, for the laws of Nigeria, and I must say, if aviation industry is in any difficulty today, it's because of the cavalier attitude of FAN to rules and processes.
I mean, FAN is a party to the agreement, because we're talking of airport management, airport concession. And FAN was the one that executed this agreement along with the Honorable Minister of Aviation. And there is no way that issues that will be discussed pertaining to FAN will be discussed on a committee without FAN being represented on that committee. So as far as the Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria is concerned, that committee was constituted without her being represented.
I keep saying, and that is why we are very worried on the issue of concessioning. If you don't resolve these issues that are on ground, they will go the same way, sign agreements, and mortgage our future.
The committee also heard from the Central Bank of Nigeria on the issue of foreign exchange for the sector.
The CBN intervened in the market yesterday to the tune of 313.9 million. And out of this total value, 69.164 million, which is 31.91% of the total value, went to the aviation industry.
The committee is asking the bank to put in place a special exchange rate for the aviation sector. At the end of the public hearing, the committee is expected to present its recommendations to the House. Our next report looks at some other issues considered by some committees in the House of Representatives.
Officials of the Federal Capital Territory appearing before the House of Representatives Committee on Federal Capital Territory. They are to answer questions on the collection of tenement rates in the territory, a step the committee says is illegal.
Our intention here is to find out why, in the face of the fact that there is this act, certain persons have engaged in collecting these rates, knowing clearly that they're illegal.
Another member of the committee, however, has a different position on the matter.
They have the power to collect the tenement rate. Mr. Chairman, inviting even the FCT administration on this matter, there's a constitutional conflict. So I plead that the FCT committee and FCTA committee, including the minister, should sit down and harmonize this matter.
This led to a disagreement that could not be resolved.
Gisalo, I will not come to your committee and do what you're doing. I have a lot of respect for you. I expect that I rule you out of order. Please just hold it. I rule you out of order. What Honorable Gisalo is doing absolutely offends me.
Till we have an executive session so that we sort out this.
At another meeting, the chairman of the House Committee on Maritime Safety, Education and Administration, Rep. Umar Bago, and the Director General of the Nigeria Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, NIMASA, Dakuku Peterside, disagreed over the amount of debt owed the agency. The disagreement followed a discussion on the award of a debt recovery contract, which the committee says it is investigating.
For me to quickly correct the erroneous impression that at any point in time, I said NIMASA was being owed $5 billion. Mr. Chairman, in the past 4 years, an entire volume of shipping trade in Nigeria is not up to $10 billion. I don't know.
DG, I beg to disagree.
No problem, Chairman. You have
because,
right to disagree.
listen, let me guide you. LNG alone, in the last 4 years, has done more than $10 billion and the records are there. Even NIMASA made some recoveries from LNG very huge because of the trade they did in the past. So we also have records.
The committee has fixed an investigative hearing for next month when the committee promised to look into the issues raised by the petitions it received on the matter. The House of Representatives Committee on Works also had an interactive session with the Office of the Surveyor General of the Federation. Members of the committee, which is chaired by Rep. Tobi Okechukwu, also sought to understand what the agency is doing about recent tremors in the northern part of Kaduna State. According to Director in the office, Mr. Barde Jato, said Nigerians should expect more tremors in some parts of the country at any time after the recent one in Kaduna State. He, however, said that the tremors would not be as dangerous as the ones happening in other parts of the world.